Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we welcome AJ Minter to the bullpen, and we welcome back Jesse Winker to the lineup. Of course, you'll get your fill of Pete Alonso chatter as we wonder if the door is really closed there, and we have a lot of mailbag questions to get through on the rest of the offseason. So subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And man, we got some news this week finally, Joe. The lull of the offseason came to a halt for the Mets. They get a big addition to their bullpen in the lefty AJ Minter. They bring back old friend Jesse Winker to the lineup to help out at the DH spot. And the Pete Alonso chatter, well, that rolls on and hasn't changed too much. But before we get into any of that, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. Look, Connor, we're less than 3 weeks from pitchers and catchers. So as it's freezing cold outside, I am just thinking of the fact that baseball is right around the corner.
That's right. Of course, subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to drop us a review, you could drop us a mailbag question with that review. We're going to be answering a ton of them today. You can watch us on YouTube. We also take mailbag questions in the comment section below the show there as well. And this is a big week for a lot of reasons. If anyone out there is heading to Amazin Day on Saturday, yes, that is this Saturday at Citi Field, the big Mets fan festival, Joe and I will be there. The Mets Pod will be doing a show in the auditorium at 2:30 p.m. And thanks to our good friends at Cadillac, this is pretty awesome. We'll be giving away 2 tickets to a Mets game in the Cadillac Club next season. A random attendee of our show will be the lucky winner. So definitely stop by and check us out. That'll be in the auditorium at 2:30 p.m. That's Saturday at Citi Field. Amazing day. And if you haven't been in the Cadillac Club yet, Joe, we've been lucky enough to pop in there quite a few times as obviously Cadillac has been an awesome part of this show. It's a really unique experience. It's not just the drink and food, which is an A+ all around, but it's a different part of the ballpark. You kind of feel like, and when we were there at times, we were playing right field with Starling Marte is how I would put it. You get a lot of interaction. Obviously, if the ball comes that way, it's pretty thrilling. There's monitors everywhere. If there's a part of the park that you want to focus in on, you can watch on the monitor. This is a pretty special giveaway, Joe.
Oh, this is a big time giveaway. When I saw it in the rundown, I was like, dang, we're really stepping up. This is good. Connor, you and I were at the game against Cleveland, I believe, when Pete Alonso hit the home run late to right center, and we just looked just up to our right and saw it go over the fence. So it's a really cool place. Obviously, as you mentioned, the food and the drink, comfortable seat. Everyone has their own little TV monitor, and it is a vantage point you cannot get anywhere else in the stadium. As you said, you are literally on the field level, feet away from, in this year's case, Juan Soto. And what's better than that?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. We've joked before too, but in all seriousness, that was the best game of the 2023 season.
Yeah.
So it was a good one for us to go and hang out in the Cadillac Club. We're really excited. Somebody that comes to our show will get tickets to do the same thing as well. 2 tickets. All right, Joe, let's start the show as we always do with Pete Alonso. I mean, right, we'll get into the new additions, but this is the talk of town right now. There's been a lot of back and forth negotiating out loud is what I would like to call it. It seems like, the Mets have made it very well known that at some point they have business to take care of, and they've begun that business with bringing back Jesse Winker for the lineup. I don't think signing AJ Minter is something that gets in the way of bringing back Pete Alonso. That doesn't really align for me. I'm not even fully convinced that bringing back Winker closes the door on this. But Joe, obviously, the Mets are playing hardball, and that's the job, by the way. Like if you're mad right now, I get the emotions because you probably love Pete as a player, but the job of David Stearns and company is to get the best deal possible for the flexibility of this club. And at the same time, Joe, I mean, would it shock me if Pete ends up somewhere else at this point? No, but it's every time we get a rumored destination for Pete that isn't the Mets, that door closes. It was the Blue Jays most recently. They signed Anthony Santander to a 5-year deal. We know they're trying to extend Vladdy. We'll see if that actually happens. So that feels like a door that might close. Although reporters locally in Toronto are saying they're still open to the idea of bringing in Pete Alonso. I just find that defensively to be a very odd way to build a team. So at the end of the day, Joe, no matter how much we hear that this has just come to an end, I refuse to believe it. And it's not the fan in me refusing to believe it. I just think logistically, it still makes sense for both sides to find a way for Pete Alonso to be back in a Mets lineup with Juan Soto. And for the Mets, it makes sense to hold out that you're getting him on a short-term deal.
I totally agree, Connor. I think when you think about the idea about what the Mets pivot to Pete Alonso would be, AJ Minter and Jesse Winker, we'll get into those signings individually, and I like the moves that the Mets made there. I don't think those moves would have been off the table if Pete Alonso accepted the reported offer from Joel Sherman at the Post, and Will Salmon at The Athletic backed it up at 3 years and let's call it $70 million. Okay, if he took that, would the Mets have not gone for a reliever? Would they have not gone for a part of a potential platoon DH situation in Winker? I think they would have.
It's separate business, right?
It's separate. I think it's separate business. So if the Mets are going to be pivoting, I want to know what is up David Stearns' sleeve, because something else has to give. It doesn't mean that you have to replicate Pete Alonso's power in the lineup. You can do something different. For all we know, maybe Jack Flaherty is still hanging out there. Maybe the Mets decide they're going to be more pitching based and they bring in someone like Flaherty. And, I know that the Mets have not been linked to him at all. And most indications are they're good on the starting pitching side. But to me, there's another shoe to drop. And I find it very hard to believe at this point, unless something transpires, that shoe is not going to be Pete Alonso ending up back with the Mets. At 3 years and $70 million, that is a contract that, granted, the term is a factor here, but they offered him more on an AAV standpoint than Matt Olson got from the Braves. And because I know I've seen a lot of people saying how the Mets are lowballing Alonso, and the reality here is, find me another team, find me another offer, find me a better offer. And I still think in my gut that Pete Alonso will circle back to the Mets, but the Mets are at a point where they've reached an impasse in discussions with Boris and Alonso and can't agree on a value. So they simply have to start evaluating their other options. And if they fill other holes and spend more money and do more things, sure, Pete Alonso could absolutely be playing for another team in 2025. But until I get a tweet from Andy Martino or Jeff Passan or whoever that says Pete Alonso has signed with the Toronto Blue Jays or the San Francisco Giants or whatever team you want to say, I'm going to believe that this is going to circle back to the Mets.
Yeah, I'm with you. You try to apply logic from both sides in this situation, right? And you brought up the rumored offer where the Mets are comfortable going 3 years. We'll call it $70-ish million. And the fact that it has the opt-outs that you would assume Pete needs in this contract, right? So you break down that deal. One, where is the external? I just find it fascinating, Joe, and I kind of want your thoughts on this. I can't think of a time where we've been given a firm offer from another team. We hear teams sniffing around Pete Alonso, but there hasn't been this, hey, the Giants offered him 3 years, $80 million. Like, there's never. So at some point, you got to play baseball, right? And at some point, you could sit there and maybe a team swoops in and Pete's angry with the Mets or whatever it may be, or they want to save face, and you take a 1-year deal somewhere for over the qualifying offer amount from a different team. But when you try to talk yourself into that scenario, you can't even apply logic to that because Pete can hit behind Juan Soto next year. And even if you want to say he won't be hitting directly behind Juan Soto, the Mets will want lineup flexibility. Okay, he'll hit behind Mark Vientos, who's hitting behind Juan Soto, who's hitting behind Francisco Lindor. Does that not sound like RBIs just ringing from everywhere? So it's one of those situations where the Mets are putting a solid offer out there on the table. Like, it's not a disrespectful offer. That's a solid offer. And I think part of that offer is he's a homegrown star that can put his name in the record books and is a fit for the team. right now. And I think at the end of the day, if Pete's process right now is about regaining the money that he ultimately passed and now missed out on, you need to put yourself in the best situation offensively. And we just haven't seen a scenario come along where you sit here and go, hey, this team, the Dodgers want Pete Alonso in the middle of their lineup for 1 year, and he can make all the money back when he hits free agency again. So, Joe, that's where I just struggle with saying, well, this team will swoop in or that team will swoop in, because we have no evidence that there's been anything close to that happening so far.
I'm sure the Dodgers could use a right-handed bat off the bench, and Pete Alonso would fit in just swimmingly, filling in on off days, maybe platooning with Freddie Freeman a bit. That makes a ton of sense. But Connor, I wonder, are these other teams worried about being used on the Pete Alonso front? Because as much as we can talk about some of the flaws of Pete Alonso, it's undeniable the power bat that he could impact any lineup in the sport. You mean to tell me nobody wants this guy on a 3-year deal?
It is a little surprising when you factor in, like Castellanos getting that big contract a couple years ago. Right.
So it's a little weird to me. And, there could be things happening behind the scenes that we're unaware of at the moment, but just odd. Like no one wants to play ball. Our team's worried that if they come in and they say 3 years, 80, that he'll go back to the Mets and the Mets will agree to 3 years, 82, and he'll just end up back with the Mets. So I wonder if there is some of that apprehension throughout the industry. And on the Mets side of things, I really want to know what Scott Boras and Pete Alonso floated to the Mets when they floated the 3-year with opt-outs deal. Because, not saying how much anyone should spend on whatever, I find it very hard to believe that Steve Cohen, Scott Boras, David Stearns, between the three of them, can't figure out a way to bridge the gap of finances on a short-term commitment. It appears, at least on the surface, as if they've agreed to the structure of a contract, which I think is probably the more complicated thing.
I agree.
Figure out length and opt-outs. Seems like they're on the same page there. Are we haggling over $2 million a year? Are we haggling over $5 million a year? Are we haggling over $13 million a year? What is the number at, and why can't they bridge this gap?
It's a great point, Joe, is that the hard work you would think theoretically has been done. The term is always a breaking point in these contract talks, right? It's why Alex Bregman is still out there right now. The fact that Alex Bregman is out there and we're close to February, you just think term. Nobody wants to give a guy on the wrong side of 30 the kind of term that he was hoping to get. And when you look at Santander's deal, that was one where, the Blue Jays needed to close on a deal at some point. Number two, it's a 5-year deal, but as you've highlighted before, Joe, the AAV was suppressed on that deal. That's more in the line of how the Mets structured Nimmo's deal. Yes. The Mets gave Nimmo so much term because they were really comfortable with the annual average on his contract. The Mets and Pete and Boras and Stearns, they've already figured this out. Hey, you don't have a term market out there from other teams. So it's 3 years. And Pete's been it's 3 years. Then they want to make the money back by having the AAV so high. But once again, the Mets hovering around $70 million across 3 years is still really good money in the market. This isn't, I think where this all got wrong, and this is me more just kind of reading the tea leaves and drawing conclusions or connecting dots, which can be dangerous, is I think once upon a time, Joe, Alonso probably looked across town and said, why can't I be the Aaron Judge of the Mets? And obviously Judge is, this is not from last year. Judge has gone on to have some nuclear seasons since this thought probably crossed his mind. But I think that was part of Alonso's thought process. And what you sometimes can forget is your position market. Judge is a corner outfielder with center field flexibility, right? Pete Alonso is a first baseman that's a couple years away from being a DH, because that's just how this sport kind of goes. So there's a big difference there. There's a really, really big difference there. And maybe Pete got some bad advice from his previous agency before Boras, and he jumped over to Boras to kind of salvage what he missed out on. And, this is just how the market goes. And the first base market it's not kind, Joe. It's not a kind market out there.
And he wishes he had that 7-year, $158 million deal or whatever it was. He would love to have that back, but hey, he went on, he rejected that and bet on himself. And a lot of times we hear about players betting on themselves and it working out swimmingly. Juan Soto, for example, he turned down $440 million from the Nationals a few years ago, bet on himself and turned into 765. So he won there. Alonso turned it down and proceeded to have a down year and then a down year again.
Right.
At least by his standards. I don't want to make it bigger than it is. It's not like Pete Alonso had a miserable last couple of seasons. He was still over 20% above league average on OPS plus, but he just didn't have the same impact that he had previously. And that hurt his market in addition to the factors that you said. So he's in a tough spot and he's going to have a tough time making up the money that he passed on. And I know he's trying probably to make up as much as he could now. I think Pete Alonso has plenty of time left in Major League Baseball. I just unfortunately think it's going to be a lot of short-ish term commitments for as long as he's still playing in the league.
Yeah, I would agree with you. As long as he's, kind of holding out hope longer and longer, that's how it's going to kind of angle. We had a 5-star review question on Apple Podcasts from Carp15. If Pete signs with another team, do you think the Mets would go all in for Munetaka Murakami if he gets posted next year? He's able to play both third and first. So, Joe, obviously the power bat, viewed as one of the next stars coming from overseas in Murakami. What can you tell us about him? And two, is this a viable or realistic scenario on the table for the future?
When you look ahead to next offseason, which it's crazy how we operate as fans and how we've evolved. Spring training starts in less than 3 weeks, and we're getting ready to talk about what next winter is going to be.
Juan Soto, by the way, playing his first season as a New York Met. I want to make that clear.
What a time to be alive. But David Stearns is probably looking at that and saying, man, it would be good to have Pete behind Juan Soto this year. We want that thump in the lineup. We want to contend for a playoff spot right now. Man, just look a year from now. Murakami is coming over and he's 25, or he'll be 25 or 26 when he comes over. So that's really in the age range that David Stearns prefers. He's had a couple so-so years by his standard over in Japan the last couple. But if you go back, he hit over 50 home runs and was looking like the next absolute megastar coming over from Japan. So I will be very interested in following what he does this year over in the NPB. He could be setting himself up for one of those 9-figure, maybe $200 million plus type of contracts coming over. And then, of course, you have Vladimir Guerrero, another guy, if he does not sign with Toronto, will be a free agent at 27 years old. And those guys are probably more of the cup of tea that David Stearns is looking to invest in for the long term. And the Mets' work that they have done in Japan has to eventually pay off for something, right? They landed Kodai Senga. That was great. They were a finalist for Yoshinobu Yamamoto. That didn't work out. They were not a finalist for Roki Sasaki, but I know they have invested a lot of time and resources into expanding into the Asian market. And Murakami is one of those guys that could be an impact, middle of the order power bat that, as was said in the review, he's played both third and first, and we'll see how that translates to the next level. But yeah, I would say Murakami would absolutely be on the Mets' radar.
Yeah, I mean, this dude hits dingers. I mean, he's a big dude, 6'2", 215 pounds. Like you said, Joe, I know 2 years ago he had just a nuclear season with an OPS over 1,000. Last 2 years have been, he still hits a lot of home runs. He hasn't had that nuclear year.
Yeah.
And I guess for those listening go, well, of course he's a Dodger already. What Murakami should be playing wouldn't actually fit with the Dodgers finally. Unless
maybe it would.
Maybe it would.
Play third base. Max Muncy.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
I'm not even going to talk myself into this one yet. But a really good name to bring up.
But this one, Connor, what is a benefit, I guess, here if you don't want to just say he's a Dodger. This is a true free agent where The money is absolutely going to matter. Unlike the Roki Sasaki sweepstakes, where money didn't matter, Murakami will be a true posted free agent, and he could get however much money the market dictates he's worth.
All right, let's jump into another important part of the lineup, and that is the DH spot. Jesse Winker back in the fold here, Joe, and Winker comes back on a 1-year deal, which shouldn't really surprise anybody when you're, in your 30s and you're kind of more in the DH. I know Winker could stand in the corner outfield with the glove, and he didn't get to do that a lot for the Mets because he was a little banged up last year. But Winker comes back on a deal that is, some performance incentives in this, essentially a 1-year, $7.5-ish million deal for Winker. Good value for the Mets for a guy that, it's weird with Winker, Joe, because you look at the numbers as a whole and you're like, the Winker acquisition, he wasn't the same guy he was with the Nationals before the Mets got him. But if you just watched Winker play for the Mets, he had big moments. He had moments in the postseason. He brought an energy and really a snarl to the club. If anyone's listened to Joe and I, not just during the Mets pod, but as long as we've been podcasting together, as much as we love the Mets and this team, there's been years where they haven't had the bite that we hoped for. We felt like they were getting hit by a lot of pitches, not responding. They were kind of friends with everybody. And once again, this is overanalyzing a little bit, but I liked having the villain, me personally. I thought it was a nice touch for this Mets team. It was kind of an interesting puzzle piece to drop in with this core that comes with risk, because when you add a guy like that, it could be a little bit of a powder keg, but credit to the risk paid off. Winker was a great fit with this team. He obviously meshed well with this team, and I think he brought something different to this team. Joe, I like him back in the fold. Obviously somebody that will probably be the DH almost every time against right-handed pitching. There's a Marte conversation to have here that we'll have in just a second. But what were your thoughts on Winker being back? And did you have a lotto ticket on Winker signing with the Mets before Pete Alonso?
I did not, but I would be a rich man, I guess, if I did, because I thought both were going to be back, and Winker coming back makes a lot of sense. As you mentioned, Connor, when he first came over, it was a really slow start for him. It took him a little bit to get started. Then he had the big walk-off home run, I believe, was his first real moment. That was against Baltimore, I think.
It was a day game, yeah.
Yeah. That was his first signature moment, at least that I remember. And he was huge in the playoffs, where what Jesse Winker really brings to the table, he's not the classic DH in the sense that he's a masher. He has some power. He'll hit some home runs. But Jesse Winker is there to work the good at bat, take the walks, get on base, and just a different guy. And as you said, the spunk, the attitude, he's one of those guys that I think you talk about, and there's plenty of these examples, I think, throughout sports where you hate him so much when he is on the other team, but you love him so much when he's on your team. And Jesse Winker feels like he was meant to be a New York Met, and I'm glad they're able to find an agreement and keep it to 1 year. I didn't want to commit to 2 years to Winker. And if you want spunk and attitude, the 2025 Mets are for you, because now you add him and Jose Siri into the fold.
Yeah.
There's going to be some swagger on this Mets team, and that doesn't even count the swagger that Juan Soto brings, which is a little different. That's more confident swagger, and Siri and Winker are kind of more your pro wrestling heels, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say the Mets, I'll call them altercations, because brawls in baseball they don't often get there.
Jose Siri threw hands at Abner Uribe of the Brewers, so he's ready.
I'll say Mets altercations is now set at over under 1.5. With Winker and Siri here, you give each of them one that they kind of started, and you hit the over at 2. Yeah. Maybe we'll get more. I think Soto even kind of pisses people off, obviously with the shuffle, and he's just, sometimes when you're that good, you just frustrate people and the emotions come out. The Mets, we want the Mets to be a more difficult team to play against, and that has kind of been a big key of this offseason. And you brought up Winker. His ability to get on base is what excites me the most. I just think he's a guy that in that DH spot will find ways to get on base. Like you said, chip in with some home runs. If he hits 20 home runs with the amount of at-bats he gets, that's a success. And there's really not many deals that are 1-year deals that you look at and call them bad contracts. They're just not. So Happy to have Jesse Winker back. What do you think now the fit is, though, with Marte here, Joe? Because it's weird. Marte is somebody that it feels like it's very important to keep his legs fresh under him at this stage of his career. He's still extremely fast and athletic. Like when you watch Starling Marte steal a base when he's healthy, he looks like the same guy. That's what's unbelievable. He hasn't lost a step. It's inconsistent when he's available. It feels like him being a specialist DH against only lefties is such a minimal role for a player of his caliber, but maybe there's a world, Joe, at this stage of his career that's exactly what he is.
I wonder the fit on the roster at this point for Starling Marte, bringing back, like now they just have an excess of like outfield type of guys. And I know we're talking about DH, but you have Juan Soto, you have Brandon Nimmo, you have Jose Siri, you have Tyrone Taylor,
right.
You have Jesse Winker, you have Starling Marte. Are you going to carry 6 outfielders, 2 of which are like half of a DH? And, not that the money, whatever, they can afford it and it's the contract, but is it really a good idea to pay Starling Marte $19.5 million to be an insurance policy in the outfield, part-time DH?
Yeah.
Right. Like his fit feels more peculiar now than it did a week ago. Because a week ago, we thought Starling Marte as a DH makes total sense. You're getting him off his feet. We still think he could hit. And I think that opens up the possibility that there is a semblance of a trade market for him. I don't think you're getting anything huge. I think you're going to have to eat some money. Like there's some things that have to all come together for a Starling Marte trade to happen. And, maybe you just bring him to spring training. There's no harm in that. See how things go, see how people's rosters shake out, and maybe a fit happens during spring training. But the way I look at the Mets as they stand right now, and there's the possibility of Pete Alonso returning, as we mentioned, they're certainly going to want to look at either Jose Iglesias or a Jose Iglesias replacement as a utility infielder. And before you know it, you're running out of roster spots. There's not enough room for everybody. So when I look at this, I struggle to see how Starling Marte fits without something occurring to another player on the Mets roster.
Yeah, it's just an exciting roster, and I'm kind of in the minority that I think Marte has something to offer this year with his bat and speed. You're right, Joe. At some point, you have to actually build out a roster that has some balance, and it's going to be fascinating if Stearns has a trade in him that could do that. One more player acquisition note. Of course, we got to talk about AJ Minter. We knew the Mets had a big bullpen signing in them, Joe. We kind of were hoping that it was going to be of the left-handed variety. That's the exact road they go down with Minter, who will pitch this season as a 31-year-old. They give him a 2-year, $22 million contract. Minter did miss some time last year. He had 39 appearances in 2024 compared to the previous 2 years where he had 75 and 70. So this was a workhorse for the Braves in 2022 and 2023. Obviously, the stuff is really impressive, Joe. You love that he's a lefty because we felt like the Mets were really missing that top-tier left-hander in the bullpen. And the Mets go with a little bit of they're buying low in a sense compared to what Tanner Scott would have cost, who ended up with the Dodgers, of course. What did you think of this pivot after all of the noise around Scott? I love Minter as a player, as a pitcher, as a lefty. There's obviously health questions that I can't sit here and answer, and the Mets have to feel comfortable with. But I thought the overall value of the contract, specifically the term, was really good.
I had no problem with this. AJ Minter is a proven setup man at this level. I know we talked about, hey, sign a closer, which the Dodgers went and signed 2, but we'll get into the Dodgers here in a minute. But it was like sign a closer and make him the setup man for Edwin Diaz. Instead, they signed a true setup man that has proven in this role for a contender in Atlanta. He's a proven playoff pitcher. What we need to watch out for, the only thing that I will say is when you mentioned the missed time, he ended up getting a hip surgery, not too dissimilar to what David Peterson went through. And although his stats were still good in 2024, you saw a decrease in velocity on his fastball. And that you can correlate the hip to him losing just a tick off his fastball. But his cutter is such a good pitch too that he's able to navigate even if the fastball is down a touch. I'd be very interested to see as we head into Port St. Lucie what his velocity looks like as the spring progresses and he gets truly into the I don't know what I'm trying to say, gets going is an easy way to say it. But this is an impact type of reliever that the Mets added, and it is not Tanner Scott, it is not Kirby Yates, and I know those were the two big names that we talked about and Mets fans have talked about it. But let's also not discount how good AJ Minter has been over the last 5-6 years, consistently year over year in a role as a relief pitcher in baseball that is so fickle and so year over year, like results vary. He has been just such a consistent factor for the Atlanta Braves for a long time. And now he gets to come to New York and pitch in front of Edwin Diaz.
I mean, the last 5 years, this is somebody with a sub-3 ERA that is striking out almost 11 over 9 as a left-hander. There's really throughout that 5-year stretch, there's no random dip. There's some elite years. The small sample size in 2020, he was literally untouchable. He was more of a 3.7 guy in 2021 and 2023, but the consistency is really impressive, Joe. And honestly, not something that you see on the upper end of the reliever market. You have obviously upper tier guys, but like even when you go back to Tanner Scott throughout that same 5-year run in 2022, Scott had a 4.31 ERA. And I like Tanner Scott. I'm not taking away from him, but I'm just showing that a lot of these guys have these one random or two random years where you're like, oh man, he wasn't the same guy. Yeah. And there's some risk. And there's risk with every reliever contract, but this is a good piece of business for the Mets, and more importantly, Joe, just a necessary business for this team.
And an important thing is he's split neutral. So he is not like a lot of lefties tend to get crushed by right-handed hitters. And AJ Minter at times has actually even been better against right-handed hitters than he has against lefties. That cutter has really played a huge role in that. But this is like I said, a consistent, reliable, as long as his hip is good, which the Mets have some experience with hip surgery. So as long as everything is good on that front, the Mets got a guy that I think you could count on to be a reliable eighth inning guy in front of Edwin Diaz as we head into a 2025 season where the Mets might still need to do a little more in that bullpen.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's get into the mailbag here. This one from Chris Toomey, 9256. Would you guys trade Brandon Sproat for Vladdy? Would your answer change if you knew Vladdy would sign an extension afterwards? Joe, as the protector of all prospects, I will toss this one up to you.
If I know I'm getting him on an extension, not, I'll listen, but you know what? I still want to maybe look at what the market will be next winter. I'm down to trade Brandon Sproat for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I think really highly of Brandon Sproat, but Vladimir Guerrero is that true young impact hitter, and I think that would, if not soften, just entirely comfort the wound that Mets fans are going through with this whole Pete Alonso ordeal. So it's an interesting question, and I'll tell you, if they're trading Vladimir Guerrero Jr., you're not getting him just for Brandon Sproat anyway. Like it's going to cost Brandon Sproat plus. So we'll see how that all shakes out. I'm not convinced Toronto is going to be moving Vlad. I am of the belief they should be trading Vladimir Guerrero because I don't think they're going to keep him. And I don't think they're going to contend this year. So to me, they need to upgrade their farm system. They should be looking to trade him, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. But if they change their mind, I would have Brandon Sproat available if it meant I could get Vlad and then the Mets can work on a contract extension to keep him away from free agency.
I have a thought and a question. My thought is, I agree with you. I would do this depending on, of course, the extension. But how do you factor, Joe, that here's something I love about it. Juan Soto and Vlad entering their primes, not 30, not 31, mid-20s, entering their primes, are now hitting together in your lineup for what you can call a 6-year run of like, these guys should be elite. In terms of duos and lineups, this is about as good as it should get around baseball. My second part, though, thinking beyond that, Joe, is there a concern of Soto and Vlad lining up and having to transition to DH at the same time?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid concern. I mean, Vlad, all due respect, is not the most physically fit player in the sport. I think that's fair to say. So I don't know when that DH clock will start with him. He was a pretty good defensive first baseman on, some of the metrics out there, so it wasn't too bad. But there's going to be a point in time where that changes, and that could change on a dime. I mean, we're talking about Pete Alonso. He never really graded out great defensively on the metric side, but if you watched him day to day, I've always felt like Pete is a perfectly fine first baseman, and he has his strengths when, scooping balls out of the dirt. But that's absolutely something to consider. You can't have two DHs, and David Stearns values defense so much throughout the diamond that I don't know how much maybe poor defense he's willing to deal with and how long he's willing to deal with it for. But that would definitely be something that you have to at least keep in the back of your mind as you're investing $765 million in Juan Soto and $400 million plus into Vlad or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think it's part of the reason the Mets never even entertained coming out of this offseason giving Pete Alonso a 6-year deal. Like if another team came out and gave Pete a 5-6 year deal, I don't think the Mets would have even matched. I think this is something that's on their minds, and I don't want to, pour cold water on the Vlad edition because I'd be as excited as any Met fan in the world. But it's something that crossed my mind for the, after a half decade we're talking about, not initially. It's just something. These are things that front office guys think of, though. All right, so we got one more question for today's mailbag. I've heard it's coming from a long-time listener, but first-time caller. And this one is from Joe DeMayo. Yes, Joe DeMayo from the Mets pod. Are the LA Dodgers bad for baseball? This is a great question. We don't get into a lot of big-picture baseball talk on this show. A lot of it is so Mets-focused, which we love. But this is the biggest conversation not only around the sport right now, it's one of the bigger conversations, I think, across the major sports, because the Dodgers, every day you wake up, have made another big money signing, or really high-profile signing, because Sasaki wasn't about the money. Sasaki was just a high-profile signing. I have an alternate take on this, Joe, and I'm not surprised. This isn't me being like a contrarian or anything like that. I'm not surprised people hate the Dodgers and they hate this, and the general surface level take is this is bad for the sport. I don't necessarily disagree. I think baseball has an issue. Baseball has an owner issue right now, not a market issue. And that's the biggest, false narrative, I think, in the sport right now. A lot of people equate baseball's problem being that Steve Cohen, the Yankees, the Dodgers, sometimes the Red Sox, teams like that, they have more money than everyone else, and it's not fair. I think that's total BS. I think it's true. They have more money than everyone else. I also think they just happen to have a lot of money and are willing to spend it back on the team to make it better. Look around and actually do the research on the owners around baseball. 90% of them have the money and the revenue to make significant moves every single offseason, and they choose not to. It's going on with the Cubs right now. It goes on with the Pittsburgh Pirates every year. It goes on with the Cleveland Guardians every single year. These owners have a ton of money, and they have zero interest in investing in the team to the highest degree to help them win. It's an owner problem. It's not a market problem. There's a massive difference. This brings me to the Dodgers, because I think if those issues that I just broke down across the sport didn't exist, this wouldn't be happening with the Dodgers. But the Dodgers are one of the teams that they do not care. They're a destination, and they spend money, and this magnifies them being a problem. And it's not, there is a part of it that, like, at large, it's an issue. But if the issue underneath it all didn't exist, this wouldn't be a Dodgers thing. So as a Mets fan, I don't care. I want everybody to hate the Dodgers. I want the Mets to be the underdog against the Dodgers, which is hilarious considering they just spent $800 million on one player. I don't mind. I think it's great for baseball that there's a villain team. This is how once upon a time everybody looked at the Yankees when you and I were growing up, Joe. And when that team loses, everybody besides the fans of that team, they love it. So I enjoy that. I think it's good for the sport. I think it's going to be incredible for the National League if somebody takes down the Dodgers, because it's all you'll hear about. And it's not the Mets being laughed at. But the way I look at it, Joe, is there's an underlying issue in baseball that has caused this. And for some reason, an obvious reason, the Dodgers catch 100% of the blame when it's not 100% their fault.
Well said, Connor. And I'd like to preface this with the Dodgers are super, super annoying. Like, let's just start there. Incredibly annoying. But are they bad for baseball? They are not. You mentioned the Cubs. Their owner the other day at Cubs Fest said in public, on the record,
the Fan Fest.
Yeah, the Fan Fest, which we're going to be at Amazin Day on Saturday.
Steve Cohen's not doing that.
Steve Cohen, no chance. And their owner said, my goal is to break even. And that, to me, is the problem. We could get after, the Tampa Bay Rays and the Miami Marlins and the Las Vegas, Sacramento, Oakland A's, whatever they are. You could get after those teams. But the reality here is the Dodgers are playing within the confines of the rules. Can we argue that some of the rules need to change? Sure. Should there be some semblance of restrictions on deferred money? Can you just defer everything? How much can you defer? Is there something you could do there? A salary cap is not the answer.
No, it's not.
And a salary cap is, I just want to say, spoiler, a salary cap is not coming to Major League Baseball. A salary cap won't be coming without a salary floor, and a salary floor isn't coming. So those things just happen. Can they do harsher penalties on how much you spend over the luxury tax? Sure. But teams like the Dodgers, teams like the Yankees, teams like the Mets, those teams respectfully aren't going to care too much about whatever those penalties are, because they are largely just financial, and they have the finances and a willingness to do it because those are teams that want to win. There is a lack of desire to win in the marketplace right now. And I think free agency over the last couple of years, we have, in a way, almost spun on the team owner side of things, because we're talking about Pete Alonso, and it's just Pete Alonso, this is the market. This is what you're worth. You can't get a bigger deal than this. Or Alex Bregman. It's not a good thing that those players are lingering around, but that isn't the Dodgers' problem, because they're out and they're trying to sign everybody they can. That is the Cubs, the Guardians, those other teams that you mentioned that, look, they are all owned by multi-billionaires. They have enough money. If the Detroit Tigers want Alex Bregman, they can afford to sign Alex Bregman for a 4 or 5 year contract for some pretty good money. And I'm not advocating that they just make bad investments everywhere because they have the money. But to me, the Dodgers are not bad for baseball. They are operating within the confines of the system. They have a awesome team. And as you said, there's a true villain in the sport that hasn't been seen in a very long time. They are the evil empire, just like the Yankees were. It's a different scale, but it's the same difference, where the Yankees were just so far and above everybody else in what they were spending. The Dodgers are right now in the same exact situation. So good for them, I guess. And it is now, as you said, 29-1. Every fan, we can all unify in a world nowadays that unifying on anything is so dang difficult. As baseball fans, we could all come together and say, we don't want the Dodgers to win. And it is on the teams themselves to stop the Dodgers from winning. And that is not just on the field. That is, hey, Cubs, you offered Tanner Scott $65 million instead of the 72 he got from the Dodgers. How about you outbid the Dodgers and you stop him from going there? That's something that could have happened and did not happen. And what I would like to remind some Mets fans that are particularly perturbed at the moment, I don't think you would be too upset if we had 18 emergency episodes this offseason and the Mets were doing exactly what the Dodgers are doing. I could tell you, I'd be ecstatic if that's what they were doing.
Right.
So I think envy and jealousy is a big part of this, and that doesn't make them bad for baseball. I think it brings some intrigue. Are there some people that'll tap out? Maybe a very small amount, but if you really like baseball, you're not going to stop watching baseball because the Dodgers are awesome. Like that's just not how it works. So big picture, to me, not a big problem. The problem is the other teams throughout the sport and ownership and all of that it plays into it. And the next CBA though, that is going to be something that lockout, strike, that kind of stuff. I could already foresee it coming.
Right. You nailed it where you love it if you're rooting for that team. So don't be mad at it. I think the deferred money loophole, there's an issue there. Like that's
absolutely.
We can all sit here and say that is an issue that they are exploiting to a degree that's the league needs to figure all of that out for sure. There are other advantages though. It just is what it is. And it goes back to you want more of that in the sport. You don't want less of it. Baseball is viewed as a sport that has needed kind of a kick in the rear end. And I think that what the Dodgers are doing is helping it a little bit. I thought the Soto sweeps, remember 2 years ago, Joe, we were all sitting there over a year and a half saying, man, like if Ohtani opens up his free agency, this could be what baseball needs. People will cover this for a month. They'll gravitate to it. It'll be a big story. And he didn't want any of that. And that's his right. But I thought that was really bad for baseball. And Soto obviously went the other way. And it's a little different because, like, as Mets podcasters, we came out on top. But the chase was fun. We enjoyed the entire sweepstakes no matter what. So high-profile acquisitions are good for the sport. Finding a way to get more markets involved in them. And I'm not saying the Pittsburgh Pirates need to be in on Juan Soto. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you need those teams in on the above average and average free agents. That's what you need. That will help your roster. So not just sitting out and saying, you know what? We're not buyers this year. Like that's not... You need to use every avenue to get better as a club. And you don't have to spend on the top 5 free agents to do that. But if you just sit out entirely, that's where the issue lies. And that's why, if there was more teams doing that, Joe, then the Dodgers don't swoop in and buy all of these free agents. So, I mean, it's kind of a way to put a bow on the combo. Yeah, go ahead.
There are multiple teams, one of which is the San Diego Padres, that have not issued a major league contract to a free agent this offseason. Like, that is crazy. There should not be an offseason where your favorite team, I mean, obviously Mets fans are listening to this, but if you are a Padres fan that somehow found this in your algorithm and stayed all the way till the end of the Mets pod, like, there should be no season. There should be no season in which your team just acquires nobody. Like, I get you can't. There's only so many big fish, only so many to go around, and I get all that. But every team should be involved to some degree in trying to help their team at least be somewhat of a contender. That was the premise of Major League Baseball introducing the extra wild card spots, was so other teams had a chance. And, maybe that suppressed some teams' desire to spend to a degree because it's not as hard. But, man, it's difficult to see all this stuff happening year over year. And, it's the Dodgers are just operating this system better than everyone else. And we'll see as we move forward. I think there should be a limit, as you mentioned, Connor, right at the top there, some kind of limit on how much you can defer of a contract. You should not be able to defer 98% of Shohei Ohtani's $700 million contract. I don't know what that number is. It's not my job, but there should be something that just brings in the reins a little bit to try to help level the playing field.
Yeah, you can clean aspects up that.
Oh, and I wish the Red Sox got Alex Bregman. Can you imagine the juice of Major League Baseball in 2025 if you have the evil Empire Dodgers, you have the Red Sox-Yankees rivalry reignited, you have Juan Soto with the Mets, and the Mets becoming a real national, like, legitimate contending team. Like, those are all good things for the sport to have all of those things happen. So I think that was a good conversation, and I'd be interested to see what everyone else thinks. So I did it last week and it worked. Leave in the comments what you think. Are the Dodgers bad for baseball?
Yeah, I would love to know everybody's thoughts. I see it feels like the majority often feels that way, but I do think there are people out there that are kind of enjoying the villain aspect of it. And hey, maybe I won't be sitting here all smiling if the Mets lose to the Dodgers again in the playoffs. But at the end of the day,
take your chances.
It's
baseball. It's a crazy thing. Even the best players in the world.
They're 2 games away.
Yeah, even the best players in the world have bad weeks, bad series. Don't forget, it was, the Dodgers are slightly more stacked than they were 2 years ago, but they got wiped out by Arizona in the divisional series just in 2023. So anything could happen in a short series. I wouldn't, if our biggest issue is we're facing the Dodgers again in a playoff series, I'll be here for it.
I'm with you all the way. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. Of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. A reminder, we are going to be at Amazin Day this Saturday at Citi Field. Our show will be at 2:30 p.m. from the auditorium, and you'll want to be there because a random attendee will win 2 tickets for a game at the Cadillac Club. Not just any seats, but the Cadillac Club at Citi Field. We can't wait to put on a show for everybody. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see most of you on Saturday.